I hope everyone found that relatively useful and wasn't too underwhelmed by by any lack of expertise you detected. My aim was to just present our experience to date, my own role in that as the person setting up the systems for teaching online and to providing some of the training and some of the procedures to follow as well, and then coming along with the quality assurance. We're still figuring it out, and that's probably quite obvious as well from what I was saying in that part. But at the same time, we have gathered some ideas and thoughts at this stage so far. There were some interesting kind of comments and themes in the chat there throughout. And like if I do them maybe in order of when they came up in the chat and we can give them a few minutes each, like there was an interesting topic raised about the difference between online teaching and teaching online. And Neil made some interesting points and some other people contributed as well. And if I summarize this correctly, the idea of not just transferring what you do online, and that would have been, I would fully say, like when we started at the beginning, I think I mentioned the priority was to keep students in class, to keep everybody teaching and working. It's just how can we get online as quickly as possible? So it's like, okay, Zoom, let's go. And then a little bit later, you add Moodle. But there's much more to it than that. It's a different medium and it's a different way of communicating. So just bringing what you did in the classroom to bring that online is not really enough, and you're not really taking advantage of the opportunities there. And it's considering a different way of doing things, a different blend of synchronous and asynchronous. Not everything needs to be synchronous, and I presume everyone's familiar with the term, but not everything needs to be live interaction. It's a little bit harder to stay concentrating for an hour and a half in an interaction online with somebody. It's easier maybe to break it up into different parts if you have the liberty and can do that with the class times. I don't know if anybody else would have any comments on the difference between, or the differences to your philosophy once you're teaching online. And I'm also breaking one of my own cardinal rules as well, making sure that people can hear you and that the microphone is working before asking them a question. It's always going to happen with online teaching as well. There's another comment in here that moving away from emergency remote teaching to something distinct. And that's the point that Neil has summarized there. Emergency teaching, in our case, legislatively, we had to keep teaching 15 hours, and there wasn't the ability to change that. But once you get used to the platform, in this case Zoom, once you get used to that way of teaching, an hour and a half lesson can still be broken up into segments. You can use the breakouts much more expansively, like for a 20-minute quiet working period. If you cannot change the class times, there are other ways to do that.
Just on the point about sort of asynchronous and synchronous and emergency teaching, remote teaching, I think certainly at the beginning that was exactly my experience as well, and people were asking me how do I basically replicate what I normally do in my classroom to doing it online. And I think at the beginning as well, tools like whiteboard.fi, for example, was a real hit because of the fact that it was replicating those people that were fans of mini whiteboards. They could just essentially, share their screen, set up the link with the students, and then they could all then have their own mini whiteboard, and language teachers could see immediately how you could use that for conveying meaning through annotation, through images, through text, how they could use it for grammar practice and verb conjugation and digital storytelling and so on and so forth. But certainly something which I've been involved in relation to the conversation around remote teaching and hybrid teaching, and where we went from that emergency state to a more sort of considered situation around remote teaching and hybrid teaching, was through the webinars which I helped to organise through TILT. So TILT stands for Technology and Language Teaching, which I helped to organise through the Association for Language Learning. And the idea behind those, we've done about 150, I think, since March of last year. The idea behind that was exactly to have the conversation around different tools and different ways of working and different pedagogies. And by asking many, many different teachers from around the world to share their good practice, we were able to work out, like the cream of the crop of the ideas and the tools and what have you that are out there. So we could then be more considered around what we would then do in and out of the classroom, asynchronous, synchronous, screencasting, live lessons, and all the rest of it. And I think that was something was obviously very much needed, but also it's been a real pleasure to see all the different ways in which teachers have been using different tools and different ideas and sharing this whole sharing culture. Robert was referring to the network of sharing of online teaching ideas. To me, that's been one of the silver linings of this whole situation, the way in which from around the world language teachers have come together and have shared ideas and shared tweets and webinars and recordings and supported each other. And I think it's been really, really wonderful to see. And those conversations that, let's say, the big fans of technology and languages have had for many years, suddenly those conversations were much, much wider and involved many, many more people. And as a result of that, it's taken us to a whole new level, in my opinion. And certainly it's getting us ready for preparing us for whatever may come next in relation to, there's not longer the argument about, should we be teaching online because of the fact we've been forced to teach online. I think, I don't know if Robert agrees, but the mindset and the culture around online teaching now, people want to have, or certainly wanted to have the conversation. They might be sick of it now, they might be looking forward to their summer holidays, but certainly wanted to have the conversation around what works best, because teachers are keen, enthusiastic, and they want to do the best by their students. And so as a result of that, there's been the keen ones have been really keen to share, and everybody has benefited. So that's my two pence worth on that point anyway.
The community is key, I think, that because even like you mentioned a whiteboard tool, for example, and the Zoom whiteboard isn't really anything remarkable, and people will have found different things, and it's word of mouth is so important because it's hard to find everything. There's so much out there, and if somebody can go, I found this really good whiteboard tool, like the way we found WordWall was the same way. Somebody said, oh, this is a really good tool for gamifications, and then I think we got you, Joe, to do some training on it. So like the way these things can travel, it can be quite organic, and the resource is so important, and to learn from each other. I think Neil, you were raising that question as well about like the best practice of teaching online and even doing things maybe you couldn't do in the classroom, but did you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And thank you both for a fascinating webinar. I mean, as you probably picked up, I've been interested in this aspect of teaching for over 20 years now. It certainly predates the pandemic. But I think in terms of best practice, we are still very close. We're, a year and 3 months away. And therefore, I think it is an emergent area. Certainly, the making the most of the synchronous time, the live lesson, to encourage as much peer-to-peer interaction, I think is key. Thinking about what can be done asynchronously, perhaps an exam class and a general English class would differ, with maybe more reading in class synchronous time, possibly taking place in the exam class, just to make sure that students are reading in a principled and appropriate way. But I can't help thinking there is probably more to it than that we will see an emergent understanding of how we can refine that understanding of best practice in online teaching.
Yeah,
fascinating to find out what other people think.
Sorry, I couldn't agree. Just on that point, I absolutely couldn't agree more. And I think in relation to choosing what works best in a synchronous context and what works best in an asynchronous context, I think is really, really interesting. Certainly, say, for example, in relation to writing, because if you set writing as an asynchronous task, what do you do to avoid students using Google Translate, which is a huge issue out there, I think? And how do you... So I know, for example, some teachers will never set writing homework because of the fact they know that their students, or far too many of their students, will use Google Translate and just think they've done the work and they've submitted it and they think about something else or what have you. But in fact, that's not helping anybody. And then the teacher then has to have the conversation with the student about why have they used a past tense, let's say, in their first year of learning when they haven't actually covered that at all, and all the rest of it. So I think there's issues around that. I think in relation also, if we're talking about a hybrid context whereby, let's say, certainly say in the UK now, people have been back in schools for quite a few weeks now. So for speaking, if the children are wearing masks, I know they're now being told they don't have to wear masks, but if they're wearing masks, then is it better to do speaking asynchronously as opposed by using various online tools for doing that, as opposed to doing it synchronously? Because in one of the Tilt webinars we had a couple of weeks ago, that was actually a university lecturer that was talking about it, and she was saying that she had found that the speaking had actually been better asynchronously. In other words, when you didn't have the distraction of people having masks and what have you in the lessons, it was actually better to do that asynchronously. Which so I think you're exactly right, Neil. It's about finding the way. I agree totally that we're still in this emergent context of working out what works. But and of course it would be different from different age groups as well. It's just working out what works. And I think one thing that came up quite quickly as well in the sort of the UK context was there were lots of schools that didn't allow synchronous lessons to happen for safeguarding reasons, as Robert was saying in his presentation. That sort of the intimate nature of being able to look into other people's houses and what have you. That there were lots of schools, certainly in the state sector, that didn't allow that to happen for safeguarding reasons. In other words, children being able to see in each other's houses, and there being possible issues around that in relation to the economic background of the children involved, and also seeing into teachers' houses and vice versa. And so there were lots of teachers who, as a result of that, decided they were going to create screencasts by using various online tools, even just adding audio to a PowerPoint and things like that, and saving it as a video. And I think there were lots of teachers, certainly my experience looking on various fora, that was the first time they'd ever done anything like that. So I think teachers have been amazing during this time, and I think there is a huge amount of support out there, but I think teachers have been really brave, maybe trying things out for the first time they've never done before. So I think there's lots and lots of issues we could talk about around this, and I think it's been a huge learning curve, to use a cliche, for everybody. So I mean, on as I was saying with screencasting, one idea, if schools were allowed to do synchronous lessons, it seems to be, through my experience, that what some people are doing is they're having like a live synchronous starter activity, which could be using, say, Mentimeter that Robert talked about, to do some retrieval practice and some remembering what they've done in the previous lesson or the previous lessons or what have you, then setting some sort of independent task whereby the teacher would be the facilitator, would be in the background, but would always be there for answering any questions that the students may have, and then to do some sort of gamified Kahoot, quizzes, Bluecut type, word wall type activity at the end to like finish the lesson on a bang, and with a buzz, as it were. So I think one of the reasons that people did that, or have decided to do that, because they felt that doing all synchronous lessons became a bit exhausting, and so they've sort of changed things around a bit and actually found that setting independent tasks have been more successful. But and also, I think in relation to sort of the independent sector and the state sector, in the state sector, there's been huge issues around the children having access, to a digital device and internet connectivity, whereas in the independent sector, I think that hasn't been the same issue at all. And it's almost, my understanding is, in some schools certainly, it's been more sort of like, as normal as it can be, as it were, following the same times in the same timetable as a normal. As if the children were face to face, but certainly that's not been the situation in state schools, and that's why asynchronous opportunities have become more and more important and prevalent. I think those are a few more thoughts anyway.
I think it goes back to lesson planning as well, doesn't it? I know it's not a very exciting thing to say, like lesson planning is important, but when I was teaching full time, I wouldn't have been the best lesson planner, and I would have always left a certain amount for improvisation, to read the room and say, okay, this maybe works best as an individual task, or this maybe works well as a pair's task, and try and decide what the classroom needs at that point. And I don't know if the people who are here would be like that, maybe more improvisational style or very regimented lesson planning. But moving online, the interaction dynamic, and that's the template plan I had up there, has this as the first column for a reason, that you can't improvise the interaction dynamic, and it's very difficult to change it. And if that's at the start, like, and with all the other ways you might be restricted, like with safeguarding and legislative things, like you're saying, Joe, or maybe just technical resources available if something is asynchronous or synchronous. But then once you're putting it into the class itself, it's very difficult to react and pivot. So deciding how you want the interaction to happen before the lesson becomes so important, much more important than it would be, I think, in a physical classroom.
Yeah, I agree, and also I think with like best laid plans as well. What do you do if the students refuse to turn on their microphones and turn on their webcams, and it's if you're talking to the abyss, as it were? And again, that's a situation which I've seen lots of people talking about as well. So I couldn't agree more. Lesson planning is obviously key, but also I think having an element of flexibility or using maybe some sort of game at the end as a carrot as well, I think can be very important as well.
Yeah, I've used music quite a bit with online teaching to signify the end. Sometimes at the end of the lesson, it's kind of hard to signify. You don't want to press that button to end the class. People might be inclined to stay on. So I developed a habit of using a song that maybe had some of the target language for the day. And it's quite easy. It's one of the things that's quite easy to do when you're teaching online. It's easy to stream something from YouTube. And the song, maybe anytime I needed to gather my thoughts, it had this double function. Everybody listened to the song for 30 seconds while I find the window where I had this thing open. And then at the end, maybe do a quick share of the lyrics and play the song. And then people know when the song is finished, it's time for my coffee. Because that's not always obvious either. I was going to share the results of the poll, actually, because maybe it's kind of related to what we've been talking about. We asked that question. I think most people here chipped in with a vote, what the most difficult thing about teaching online is. And there were two of the four options I put up there. There were two really, which I think were what occurred to me anyway, that maybe candidates for the most difficult thing. The two by a long way that people said were the most difficult were building engagement or morale or motivation. And maybe that's the chemistry factor again, harder to do that online. And also students dealing with so many other things going on now as well. And the other one by a long way was both of these were like almost 80% of the votes between them. Classroom management was the other area that people said was difficult. Setting up the activities, correcting exercises and things like that. And what was interesting is not many people said getting students to speak was difficult. That seems to be something people have under control. I guess, as we've been talking about, you can ask somebody to take over, and once they're unmuted, they can speak. It's a little bit more regimented or more formal than a natural conversation. There's less interruption and ebb and flow. It's more like a series of monologues, but that's the way we communicate online. And the other one, not many people said, only 13% of people said managing the IT was the most difficult thing of teaching online. But I think there may be, as a representative sample, we're all here at a webinar. We probably at least tolerate technology about online teaching, I should say. So we're maybe interested and more adept and more ready to use the technology. But I have seen cases where teachers have gone into teaching online and not been comfortable with things like multiple monitors or typing simultaneously, and that is a challenge, Okay, so one or two of the other topics to come in on, like we talked about some of the supplementary resources, and maybe we can go into those in a little bit more detail that came up in the forum. I had an example of Padlet during the talk, and I think it was Maria Jose, I think, wasn't it, who commented that she hadn't used it yet, but was going to give it a go. I think our teachers have shared the experience that Padlet is quite an easy thing to get started on, to a way to share like a word cloud or brainstorm ideas or organize ideas by category. And the fact that it's free to use initially is an advantage, and it's quite easy to share, and people can type in text like the one I shared with our teachers. You can see quite instant results in that sense. And we talked about WordWall, which has all of these gamification techniques and ways to have interesting, like, rather than just a multiple choice question, it becomes like a race or a timed feature with all of these added like gamified elements, which can make I think can spice up an online class quite a lot. We could talk about those a little bit more if anyone has any questions, but definitely Bluekit. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Joe?
Yeah, well, apparently it's a Bluekit, as in like
okay.
but like book Bluekit, not blue. Well, I think it doesn't really matter in a way, but apparently officially it's Bluekit rather than Bluekit.
If I was from Dublin, I'd say Bluekit, but I'm not.
There we are. I think it's a little bit like Socrative or Socrative. I think officially it should be Socrative because one says Socrative questioning. But I remember when I was in Boston once about 8 years ago, talking to the guys about that, and they said we don't really mind how you pronounce it as long as you use the tool, which I just thought was a great comment. But I think officially, not that I'm a pedant, but I think officially it should be Socrative, not Socrative, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, just in relation to Blookit, Hedy asked me to sort of give a quick snapshot of how it works essentially. So Blookit is quite a new game on the block, as it were. So it's very much like a gamified way of doing multiple choice formative assessment activities, as opposed to other tools like Socrative and another tool, or Google Forms, which are more formal, I think. But I think Blookit, it's all about the gamified nature and having fun and what have you. And certainly amongst the community that I'm sort of involved in, there's been lots of interest in it. You can make your activities from scratch. You can also import a Quizlet set, which seems to be one way to go with this. So, for example, if you go to the Blookit website, you create an account, you then can click on the create an activity, or you click on the create option, which is like a pen icon, and then you have to just name the activity, and then you go down to start from scratch or import from Quizlet. You click on the import from Quizlet option, which takes you to Quizlet. You find either one of your own activities, or you can search for someone else's activity that you can then use, or a set as it's officially called. You then click on the three dots to the right of that set, and then you go down and you click on, I think it's embed if I remember correctly. So you click on that, you then copy the code, you then go back to Blookit and you paste it in, and it basically generates the activities based on that. And then from that, you then choose one of the activity types. I think it's about 9. The ones which have proved most popular, I would say, are Gold Quest, where you have to get as many points as possible, and you can steal gold from other people, including the teacher, which you can imagine is a lot of fun. And there's also a more classic, like racing type of activity. There's a classic one as well, which looks more like Kahoot. And like with other tools such as GimKit, the developers are sort of adding new variations on the games as well, which is quite fun. But I would really encourage you to have a go at it. Once you generate the game, you run the activity, you get a code, as with other tools such as quizzes and so on and so forth. A nice thing as well about, say, Blookit and WordWall and those sorts of types of activities, you don't need the students to have an account, which is absolutely brilliant. So it means you just need to have either a link or the code, or in the case of Blookit, they just go to blookit.com/play, I think it is, if I remember correctly. They go to that link, they put the code in, which is displayed very clearly on the screen. The numbers of students come up who are involved, and you can see they can choose the little icon that they have, which is very sort of student friendly, which is great. And then from there, you start the activity, and away you go. So I think it's a really cool way, I think, of practicing or learning through stealth, I think. And in relation to Neil's earlier question about, like the cream of the crop, what are the best things that are out there? I would suggest going to my YouTube channel, which is JoeDale100, and just having a look at some of the Tilt webinars that we've done, because you'll see the number of different tools that have been mentioned. I could go on and mention lots and lots of them, but essentially, just have a look through. It depends on what you're trying to do pedagogically speaking, but certainly around formative assessment, you've got ones I mentioned already, and then you've got lots of different tools out there. But again, through the community and all the discussions that have been happening during the pandemic, it becomes very clear which are the most popular tools out there. So I would say that would be a good starting point to do that. And also, I remember in January when we went straight back into the third lockdown in the UK, and that was on the Tuesday, and on the Saturday we had the first sort of show and tell session, whereby I'd invited 4 people to come along to talk about tools which hadn't been maybe talked about in the past as part of the Tilt webinar. So we had things like Blookit and Carousel Learning, which is another sort of tool for retrieval practice and formative assessment. and some other tools that escape me right now. So we did a session on the Saturday, and then the following Saturday we did another session. So amongst those two, we had like the latest things that were available, but being shared by practicing teachers. So that's when you get all that golden content whereby people are giving top tips based on their own experience, and I think you can't get enough of that. That's it. That's
so fantastic. Invaluable, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've had training sessions like that where, and we've done it in a couple of different ways, where we'll have asked teachers to go off and learn something by using it, and learn a tool inside out, and then come back and present it to the others. And it's a really good atmosphere, because you've got a staff room of teachers, and one person is presenting their experience, and everyone else is just going, I can use that in the classroom for this. I can use it in the classroom. Everyone's just thinking, and then you get to share ideas. And I think it's always really important to have a brainstorming session immediately after someone presents a tool, because that's when ideas really start flying. Because the person who learned about it maybe hasn't thought of a way to use it as well. And some things you can figure out yourself. It's a little bit like, as groups of teachers, some people will get really fond of something and get really used to it, and then they become an advocate. This is a brilliant tool for this. And that happens with individual teachers or in groups. And sometimes it's something that's easy enough to figure out by yourself. Like we had Kahoot as an example. Now, Kahoot, I would say initially we didn't use it properly, because teachers started doing that but didn't really think about the content. And going back to what Neil was saying, they didn't think about adding the value to the class. They weren't using it properly. They didn't have maybe target line. This was a particular group of maybe teachers who were quite new and not used to using technology, but it was part of the learning curve. But then when some things are a bit more, maybe need a bit more depth, and you want to listen to someone who's been there and used it quite a bit, it can speed up the process a lot more. And that's like we did. We had Joe. Joe was kind enough to do a training session for us to demo tools in that way, and that was really useful as well, because you can learn certain things yourselves and figure them out and trial and error. You can get into networks and read about, like, hopefully someone's written a nice blog entry or something like that. But sometimes you do need that actual demo. Here's how to use it, and then have the brainstorming session afterwards. One thing I was going to mention with the idea of identifying tools and sharing these ideas as well is another project which we at Atlantic are working on with gallery teachers and KKCL, and it's called the Boost project, and it's kind of related to this topic, and not just because it's some of the same people, but it's also thinking about digital resources and digital content. And it's an Erasmus project where our first task is to try and create this network and identify what kind of digital tools and resources teachers are using in classrooms. So for that end, we created a questionnaire in this quite recently. I think Hedy is able to put it in the chat. Now, some of you may have seen this questionnaire already, and some of the questions in there are asking for comments or suggestions on resources you've been using, and it's part of the networking point that Joe made. What we will be doing later then from the results we gather, we'll be recommending and prescribing a series of resources that, with the content we're creating in the project, we'll be recommending different digital resources as well. And I think the important part then is creating teacher-friendly guides that can hopefully accelerate the process as well. To go back to an example, the Kahoot example, if someone had come along with, these are 5 steps to Kahoot, it's free or it isn't. Or it's free to this point. Just explain that at the start can save a lot of time for teachers. And then this is a good way to use it. Here's a quick little 1-page guide of how this particular tool or supplement can be useful. And I think we might have some more comments on that then as well. I think, do we have Michael there as well? I'm not sure if I think I might have missed the question in the chat, Michael, if it's on this topic of digital resources or going back to something else we were talking about.
I've been teaching online. I've no experience teaching in person, or at least not for 20 years. And I love it. And I really wouldn't want to go back into the classroom. I'd love it.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. And you hadn't been teaching in the classroom for a long time, and just went back in just to do online. Are you using Zoom or something else?
I use Zoom, a subscription for Zoom. Yeah.
And have you brought in any additional tools like what we've been talking about there for a few minutes, or are you using like a digital course book, things like that in addition, or are you just using the face-to-face aspect of Zoom more?
Just face-to-face. I mostly individuals, all adults, mostly with at least intermediate level English. So there's not so, I don't know if there's so much I can do with those tools for that profile of student. They seem to be more appropriate for reasonably sized groups, which I've only got one group and it's not that large. So I rely mostly on the individual attention.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I think Luminita, am I pronouncing it correctly, has a question as well.
Yes, hello everyone. I just want first of all to say great thanks for such a resourceful and inspiring webinar, Robert. Thank you very much. The only thing I would like to mention is that, the online teaching has been a challenging opportunity for all the teachers to face. And we probably need some extra time to instill in students as well as in teachers this desire to be able to learn something new. Because you see, of course, face-to-face teaching will be never replaced by the online one, but we'll have to learn to adjust to the situation. And probably in this way, we will become even better, not only in our own eyes, but in the eyes of our students as well. So thank you very much once again for your presentation.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Luminita. Thank you for your nice feedback as well. It's an interesting point, isn't it? Like how, and I only touched on it at the very end. Like, Luminita said online teaching isn't going to replace classroom teaching, and it's not. But it's probably a way of teaching people who maybe weren't interested in classes before and now are, because they can join online. And whether that's a standalone online course or a blended course. And I know at Atlantic, that's what we'll be doing. I think the phrase I used was that the genie's out of the bottle. And we've been saying that for a while. Before the pandemic and before it became necessary to teach online, we were thinking of how can we add a blended component to some of our courses, because we were conscious that people were finishing their course and going back to their home country, and they were friends with their classmates and they had a good rapport with their teacher, and that was just ending. So it was kind of a waste of all this time people could spend together. And we thought, okay, we need to add something that people can stay in touch and maybe do some kind of online top up, or maybe have some feedback on writing exercises, whatever they might be working on. But then of course we had to temporarily replace classroom with online. But now that when going back to the classroom, which we soon will be, we want to retain the advantages of online and these new skills we've picked up. So I think that's where we'll get into blended as well as hybrid. And I would distinguish blended from hybrid in that with blended we'll add a way to participate in a class before and after people travel to Ireland. But then hybrid, to make the distinction that people may never travel to Ireland, but still participate in a class, in a classroom atmosphere. But it is a little bit of an unknown future. And I don't know if anybody else, if Joe or any of the others who are speaking have any thoughts on what's going to happen next. We can only speculate, I guess. But 6 months from now, I'm pretty sure we're not going to be all putting computers and internet to one side, going back to a chalk and a duster. But maybe we will overcompensate and correct our course a little bit. But when it comes out to when it returns to the average or the mean, what's the new average going to be? And I don't know. I'd be interested to hear your opinion on that, Joe.
Well, I think, again, the reason I wanted to put together this whole series of different webinars with lots and lots and lots of different perspectives of different people was for the very reason of to encourage teachers to watch them and to learn from everyone's different context, because as you say, the future is very very uncertain. But if we've done sessions around, let's say, purely remote teaching ideas, hybrid teaching ideas, a blended approach, and everything in between, that it should equip teachers with a good understanding of how to adapt. Because I think there was a real fear right at the beginning of people. There were lots of people that never taught in this way before. I'm fascinated by what Michael was saying about thoroughly enjoying the online teaching and not wanting to go back to face-to-face teaching. But I think for lots and lots of people, it was, it's been a very worrying time, and that's why I thought the best thing to do was to, as much as possible, to put people's fears at rest, and to just, as with anything, learning about what to do and how to cope with the situation. And the other thing I would say as well, something that I found incredibly useful is to be part of this language teaching community known as the MFL Twitterati, which I can put in the chat. And in relation to finding out, people to connect with and ideas around certain tools. Let's say if you do a search for MFL Twitterati plus a keyword such as Padlet, let's say, or Blookit or whatever it might be, then you'll get really good results straight away, which means it will allow you to see what other people are tweeting about, but also connect with them and ask them more questions around exactly how they're using such and such a tool and why they think it has value. Because I think that was a point made a moment ago in the chat. And I think, focusing on the why, I think it was Neil, wasn't it, that talked about that, focusing on the why. I think through Twitter, through a social media community that we've sort of talked about a little bit already, I think that being able to ask those questions of the people using that particular tool, let's say in the classroom or outside of the classroom, is really key, which is something I've been saying for years and years and years, but certainly at the moment is particularly pertinent, I think.
Hi there. I mean, I'm just really interested to find out from everyone, present panelists and participants, what their thoughts are regarding online accreditation. In other words, the accreditation of online courses. This is something that here in the UK, the British Council is looking at, but it will be for synchronous content only. They see everything else as being a package without teaching, which may or may not be problematic, but just interested, who should do it? Should there be minimum requirements for teacher training and so on?
Absolutely. I guess from our end, we're an equals accredited school, and we understand that part of that process is moving online inspections and so forth. And I think there's work going on towards the new criteria, similarly to the British Council, which we're not a part of. But there's work going on in terms of developing the framework and the new standards that we'll be subject to but I suppose our first immediate phase is the dust has to settle with getting back in Ireland. We're a little bit later getting back open, and then there are schools like Atlantic and where we have a lot of new courses and new programs online, and being quite creative, and then doing hybrid courses and blended courses as well, as I mentioned. So once they settle in, we'll be looking at quality assurance, and I think by the time there should be a nice synchronized overlap when new frameworks are ready for accreditation, and we instead of just doing internal quality assurance and standards, we get some benchmarks there to actually measure ourselves against as well. That will be our own particular experience, but others may have comments more on the BC framework or other experiences. I'm not sure if there are other comments there on that.